got a phone call from Forbes magazine, and they told me, hey, we want to let you know that we chose you to be one of the 30th most influential people in Israel. I was like, oh, wow. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Didn't expect that. When I was 5 in the kindergarten, my parents were told that I was super hyperactive then. Back then, I was like, I couldn't sit for a moment. Even when I was eating, I would go around the table and eat there, and I was already all the time wanted to be outside. I couldn't be inside a space. And my parents were told that if I will go to school, I will need to take loads of Ritalin. And they were really not into it. So we moved to the north of Israel, and I went to an open school that's called Meitar. It was on a mountain inside a kind of a forest, and there were no classrooms there, no teachers, no schedule. I would come there at like 8 o'clock in the morning. We'll meditate for 30 minutes, and then everybody does whatever they want. And I didn't study how to read or how to write or math. I was climbing on trees and picking up mushrooms. And the idea there was that the emphasis was on what comes naturally from the child. So if my truth at that morning was not to sit in a classroom, then I wouldn't sit in a classroom. And if nothing comes from it, I have no inspiration, and I would just sit and do nothing. And there was actually, they were honoring the boredom. Like, yeah, be bored. It's okay, just sit down and do nothing, and that's fine. And I was sometimes doing that. I was just sitting down and doing nothing. But then inspiration came, and I was like, oh wow, I wanna play something, or I wanna climb on a tree. And different inspirations came. And I remember actually one day, I was maybe 7, and I just had an idea to build houses of mud. And I had like this inspiration of big houses of mud, with like where I can be inside and even light fires inside. And I couldn't do it by myself, so I went to one of the mentors that were there. His name was Michael. And I told him, look, I have this fucking good idea. I didn't say fucking then, but I said, I have this good idea, and it's like house of mud, and just imagine, and we do it like this, and we do it there. And he got super excited about it. And, yeah, let's do it. And we just got a few friends of mine, and we were like 8 people, and for an entire week, all that we did was building houses of mud. And in the end of the week, there were like big houses of mud, just the way I saw it. And I was like, wow, it's like this image that I have in my mind can actually manifest in matter, in mud. And I remember that moment really was really, it showed me something that later on in my life, I could have kind of get there again and understand this again. And during that time, one thing that was always there was money. Both of my parents were artists. They didn't make any money. We were always dependent on my grandpa. And and sometimes when I wanted things, like toys or stuff, they could never buy it for me. And there was only one time in the year when I could have a new toy, a present, and it was in my birthday. And the maximum amount was $70, 150 shekels, and that was it. And there was one when I was 8. There was one day that I really wanted to have. It's called Megabloks. It's like, you know what it is?
Yeah, like Lego, big Lego?
Yeah, it's kind of Legos with dragons and castles, and all of my friends had it, and I wanted it too, and I told to my parents, and they were like, well, it costs 600 shekels, but what we can do is that every birthday we'll give you the money, and then in 4 years, you could have the Megabloks.
4 years later.
And I remember I was 8 then, And I was like, 4 years? You know, when you're 8, 4 years is like half of your life. and, and it's kind of all of what you remember, so it's like a lifetime, basically. And
I have to wait another lifetime for Megabloks.
exactly. and I was like, no way, I'm gonna get it. And we lived in an artist's village. And every weekend there would be people coming into the village and just visitors, tourists going around the galleries and seeing the houses there, architecture. And one day I just had a hit. I saw these people, they were walking in the sun, and I was like, oh, what if I sell lemonade? And then I was just kind of found a really good spot where there was sun, no shade, everybody had to come through, and no other competitors. So I set it up.
It's free real estate.
Yeah, exactly. And I set it up, and it turned out to be a very lucrative initiative. And I just made much more money than my parents at the time, so I could buy the Megabloks, and I could start supporting them financially, because they just needed cash, and I had like loads of cash suddenly when I was 8, and they needed it. So I just started to lend them money, and this was another event, just like building this house of mud, that just showed me that these ideas and this inspiration that I have can actually manifest. And at that time, my drive, especially in the next years, when I was 12 and when I was 14, my parents divorced when I was 12, and then I was really ready to support my mom more and more. And I was in a cycle or in a spiral that I call the spiral of the survival. And what that spiral is, it's basically starting from a threat, and that's already coming to a state of consciousness. It's a state of consciousness that starts from a threat. And after the threat, there is an action that we make. We get into a place of temporarily safe, and then we go again to that place of threat. And it's like a spiral, because we're never actually safe. If we're good, we can spiral up until we get to a point when we're safe. If we're not good, we're dead. And that's the way that we lived for years, right? For thousands of years, that's how we lived. In nature, there were threats. We could be eaten, we could be killed, the weather, starving, and we needed to move through that spiral. And some people, especially in Western countries, I guess in New Zealand for sure, are not even experiencing that spiral. We don't know what it is to have a threat, but almost everyone has some idea of what it feels, because threats are not just threats of money or threats of food, but also when we're at school and we don't really, when we're alone there and we feel like we don't belong and we're feeling threatened by the system or by the teachers or we are bullied. So almost everyone, I believe, has some imprint of how it feels to live in such a spiral and in such a cycle. And at these years, I was really in kind of that. I was at school, and when I was 12, I left that open school and I started to go to a regular one. And then I remember I was sitting in the classroom, and the teacher was writing on the board, and I was like looking, and it looked like drawings or something.
That's really distracting. How come you did that? How come you went to a regular school instead of the open school?
How or why?
Why did you leave the open school?
Yeah, good question. So there was one time that I really liked Greek mythology.
Yeah.
I loved it,
Cool.
And my mom knew some, so she was telling me stories. But at some point, she didn't have any new stories anymore, and I wanted more. And there was a book, and I couldn't read that book.
Oh, okay.
So I was like, okay, I want to read that book. And then And then I told to my parents, hey, I want to learn how to read and write. I think I am ready to go to a regular school.
Wow.
And they were like, sure, if that's your truth now, then let's follow that. And they were really listening and waiting for my initiative and not pushing and telling me now you have to read or write.
Wow.
So it really came from that place. It's fun. It's okay there? Yeah? Good. Yeah, and I remember that day, the first day, I tried to write down, I couldn't. I remember the sound of the pencils of the other kids writing down, and I was I cannot even start. I tried to like draw, but I didn't know how. And I remember that day I went back to my mom and I said, I don't know how. I don't know how to start. And then in the beginning, what I did was just listening to what the teacher was saying, memorizing that, or not just word by word, but understanding what she was saying and then telling it to my mom. She would write. And then we would go over the letters and I would understand. Hebrew. Yeah. And I would gradually understand more and more how to read and how to write. It took me a long time. Even now I don't write so fast. But it took me some time to actually being able to write and read. I read before I wrote, I think. And then in the coming years after, I was at school and I didn't really feel belong. Also because of that, I was feeling inferior. I didn't know what they knew. I felt judged. And a few years after, we moved to Tel Aviv and to a different school. And I started, at that time I was already pretty good at school. And there was one day, we lived, me and my mother and my younger brother in Tel Aviv. And I remember one day, it was dinner time. And my mom invited me and my brother to have dinner. And she told us, look, we have no money. My grandpa stopped supporting us. And we need to find another place to live. We just cannot afford the rent. And remember at that time, in the beginning I was a bit anxious. I was like, wow, I didn't want to move. We were moving so many houses, maybe 9 houses or 10 houses, and I didn't want to move anymore. And then I just took a few breaths, and at some time I just had an idea that I would just work. And if I could make money when I was 8, and since then I was also doing some gigs and taking dogs and walking dogs and stuff. So I was like, okay, maybe I can just work. And it was, back then I remember a very kind of analytical decision of, okay, I better invest a few hours a day in working and making some money and then giving it to my mom, and then we could stay and live at the same place instead of moving. So I was looking for a job. I was 17 then. And there was one day I went to buy ice cream. There was a really good place that I loved. And I went there, and there was a really cute girl there at the ice cream store. And we kind of started talking, and I was like flirting a bit.
How old were you?
17.
Oh, yeah.
Flirting a bit, and then I was asking her out on a date, and we had a date. Wasn't so successful. But I told her that I'm looking for a job, and she said, oh, well, maybe you can work in the ice cream store. The name was Vanilla. And I was like, sure, I love ice cream. And then I remember that since I was a child, it was one of my dreams, actually, to work in an ice cream store. Just because whenever I would go to to eat ice cream, especially when it was with my dad, I would want to taste all of the flavors. And my dad wouldn't allow it because he felt embarrassed. He was like, after 2 or 3 flavors, then no more. And for me, I was like, all of them. So it was an opportunity for me to, for the first time in my life, actually taste all of them one after one. In the checklist, in my bucket list. And then I started working there. And I remember I had a job interview. The manager, his name was Roy, and he told me one thing that I really took with me and remembered. It was that we're not a bank or a pharmacy, but we're an ice cream store, and we want to make people happy. So you want to smile and you want to laugh and you want to be happy for that. And I remember that this was something that I really took with me since the beginning. I started by making maybe $10 an hour, which was pretty good for me back then, because by working a few shifts a week I could actually support, and it would have been enough. And I was pretty bad at serving ice cream. I didn't think it was possible back then before to actually not be good at serving ice cream. It seemed like quite a simple task, but I was just not so good at it. And it took me a few months of just practicing. And there was one time that I was almost leaving this job, and I remember that Roy went to me and said, "Look, if you're not into it, just leave. But if you are, I really believe that you can be amazing. So just be dedicated to it, and I trust that it will work." And that's what I did. And I remember that I was starting to practice, and I became better and better at it. And then I had an inspiration to be a shift manager. And at that time it was because the other shift managers told me always what to do, and I didn't like it. So I wanted to be the one who tells what to do. So I told Roy, "Hey, I want to be a shift manager." And I was younger than most of the shift managers, were maybe 20, 22, 25, more. And he said, "Well, it's possible, but you need to be perfect. You need to be the best in serving ice cream. You need to do the exact accurate weight of the ice cream, and it needs to be amazingly beautiful, and everything needs to be clean." And I remember that at that time I was so dedicated to it, and I'm fucking gonna be perfect. And for days I remember that when there were not customers, I would just be there and just practice again and again and again and again and again. I would just practice and until I could be exactly the weight and exactly the most beautiful figure. And then after a few months I became a shift manager and was working there for some time, and was really guided and mentored by Roy, the manager that I had back then. And a few months after, actually more than a few months, it was a year, something around a year, I just was about to finish school, and there were maybe 6 months in between from finishing school to start serving in the army. In Israel, everybody has to serve in the army. And I remember that at that time it was not Roy already, it was another manager. Her name was Marina. And she wasn't so good, and then the company wasn't so satisfied with her. She wanted to leave. And I was very dedicated at that time. I remember that one day I got a phone call from Roy. He was back then he was the operation manager of the whole company. And he said, "Look, I know it would sound weird, but we look for another manager, and I just felt you, and I feel like you can do a great job." I was like, "What? But all the managers are like 30 or 40 or 50 and I'm 18. How can I do that?" And he was like, "Yeah, I know that it sounds weird, but if you believe in yourself, we could have a meeting with the CEO, and I would try to convince him. I cannot promise anything, but let's try." And I remember that I was like, fuck. There was a part of me that didn't want to do that, actually. I just started dating with a girlfriend, and it was just a few months before starting the army. And my ideas were just chilling, every few months, working a bit, just enjoying the time. But then I just actually realized that there was no other option. I had to do it. So I said yes, and I had a meeting with the CEO. His name was Eitan, and I remember that at that meeting, he was like, he was telling me, look, I know that you are young and smart and everything, but I also know that you might not be responsible and you might leave after a month because it may be too hard. So I'm telling you, make a decision. If you think that if you leave, I will go to my room, to my safe. I will take a gun and I will just shoot you. So just decide now, like now. And I was sitting there and well.
How does that work if you had to go to the army though? Like if you had to go to the army in 6 months?
Yeah, so he knew it.
Okay.
Like okay, for 6 months.
Yeah.
A little bit less than 6, but I said okay, I'm taking this. I said okay. So I started, and I remember suddenly I was 18 and having like 20 employees that I had to manage. Most of them were much older than me, and I had an office, and suddenly I had a nice salary that I didn't think I would make, maybe for sure not when I was 18, and responsibility. But what happened then was that people started to leave. It's like whenever there's a thing in businesses that when a manager leaves, sometimes many other employees take this kind of open window to also jump. So that's what happened, and suddenly I found myself with half of the employees that I had, and I just needed to work day and night. So I started working at 5 a.m. and I was finishing at 1 or 2 a.m. and I was sleeping for 2 hours, 3 hours sometimes. I would hardly see my girlfriend. And she was like, we just started. you were coming at 1 a.m. and then you wake up 3 hours after and you go. But she was coming to the store, so she could saw me a little bit. And then, but I was so dedicated, and I knew that there were a few months, and I remember that back then, it was a bit like a game for me, you know. I just got this cool opportunity. I don't know what's gonna happen. I'm gonna stay here and make the best. But I started coming up with ideas, maybe make this reform and this change, and starting to think what I can do better and what I could change and how to make it better. And I started reading a lot of books. And I was reading what in the shifts because I was there. So when there were no customers, I was just reading books about business because suddenly I needed to understand finance. There were a few million dollars annual revenues that I needed to take care of and to understand the finance. So I started to learn it and understand how to manage people and how to do marketing for that business. And I remember that maybe because I didn't know so much back then I wasn't so kind of structured. I was very creative. So I just played around and did changes. And maybe something around, a few months after, just before I was finishing the job, I remember that I had a meeting with Eitan and Roy and the accountant of the company, and we had to go over the P&L, the reports, and I was sitting there. And in the food business, there are two metrics or two ratios that are very important. One of them is the labor cost, which is in every kind of business, and the other is the food cost. And there is a specific percentage that's considered good, and you want to be in that kind of spectrum, or that range.
The ratio between the two?
No, it's like when it comes to labor cost, you want to be at around between 26 to 32% of the total revenue, and food cost it's about 30 to 40. in that specific kind of business. In restaurants, it's different. Anyways, I was sitting there, I remember, and they started going over it. I remember that the accountant said, "There's a mistake. Something is wrong here." And my balls were like, fuck. I was already having that picture of the gun. And then they calculated again and again, and they took the data and starting to make sure. And at some point, he said to the CEO and Roy, the operation manager, "Well, it's not wrong. That these are the numbers." And they were like, "How?" Yeah. And it happened to be the best metrics in the history of that business that ever happened. Yeah. And they were in shock and wanted, write a book and share it with all of the other branches. There were about 20 in all of Israel, and tell us how you did it and how you lowered the labor cost so much and the food cost so much, and the revenue suddenly increased comparing to the months in the year before, the same months. And then I really got this kind of like passion for business. I was like excited. Wow, it works. Like I was running up ideas, and suddenly like people actually made like a few $100s more. It's pretty cool. And at that time I started the army, and I was sure that I wouldn't come back to working there. It was a very intense course of 6 months. And after the army, I was serving in Tel Aviv, just where I lived before. And I really wanted to rent a place with my partner. We really had this dream of renting a place together and living together, but we had no money. And in the army, you get something around $300 or $400 a month. That's the salary. So you cannot really do much with that. So I went back to Vanilla, the company, and to the CEO, Roy, and told him like, "Look, I need money, and of course I cannot manage a branch because I work from 8 to 6, but maybe you have any idea?" And in the beginning they said, "Not really." But then they were like, "You know what? The branches around here are in a really bad state, so maybe just, you have a bike, right?" And I said, "Yeah." Take your bike and just go around the branches and write reports. Be like an ice cream inspector. I was like, "Cool, whatever, I would do that." And that's what I started to do. And I was writing reports, and at some point I was just getting pissed off that I write the same reports again and again and things don't change. So I started arranging meetings with the managers in the branches and show them, this is how you can change, and let's make a plan so we could do better. And then it actually worked, and the branches started to do better. And a few months after, the area manager of Tel Aviv was just leaving that job after a few years, and they were telling me, "Look, actually you are doing his job anyway." so we don't know how you can manage to have enough time to do it, but you do it, so just take the job if you want and start managing the area of Tel Aviv. And I was like, great. 2 months after, my partner broke up with me. It was too much.
How old were you?
I was at that time, I was just 19, almost 20 at that time. Yeah.
How old are you now?
I'm 23.
Oh, okay. Alright, okay.
Yeah. And my partner just broke up with me 2 months after, because I would work from morning till night and would be just so much in work and job, and I was very passionate about it as well, so we kind of understand that my passion is there. And she was very free. She was Australian, she lived in Israel, and she went back to Australia. And at that time I was just working there, and I was working in the army, and I was moving from that cycle of survival to a cycle of the achiever. That's a different cycle. If the first paradigm that we have lived in is a paradigm of surviving and needing to be safe, then it becomes the paradigm of success and the achiever. And I was pretty safe there at that point. I was already making enough money. I could support my parents. But then I was suddenly, oh wow, I can succeed more. I'm climbing that ladder. And I had that belief that that's what I need in life. That's what it is about. That life is about being successful in the world and achieving stuff. And I was so motivated to becoming more and more successful. And I was setting up goals and was really devoted into achieving them. And and at that time, working both in Vanilla and in the army. I was in the army leading the research in the intelligence of macroeconomics, the global macroeconomics. So it also gave me some more understanding into the business. So they kind of helped each other as well. And then I got more and more success, and suddenly was having more branches to manage, and was mentoring the managers of the branches, and was developing them and creating plans, and the plans succeeded. And at some point, the CEO told me, "Look, you did great job in the branches that you had to look after, and they're doing great. And I want all of the company to look like that. So maybe you can be the head of strategy." And it was a big company, about 400 employees, maybe something around 50 or 60 million dollars in revenue. It was a B2C and a B2B sector for client you know what it is, consumers and for businesses. And I was like, yeah, sure. And then I started doing that job and was really getting creative with different ideas and was implementing them in the company and changing the marketing and creating new products and starting to use my my skills from the army of data analysis and using data in the company, and it was very successful. And one thing that I was really focused on back then was actually the culture of the company. And this is a cool thing for you to know because it was really useful for me. I call it the wow effect. And whenever you, let's say that you are working somewhere and you're being paid something, you're not being paid for your time, right? You're being paid for the value that you can create within that time. And there is in that spectrum, there is in between like a standard of what the expectation is. I'm paying you $4,000 or $5,000. That's the value that I'm expecting to get from you in the work that you do. And if you do a little bit more, let's say that you're staying a bit more hours, that you are doing a bit more, then great. Once I can promote someone, it may be you. And if you are doing less, a little bit less hours, and leaving early, coming up late, then once I need to fire someone, it might be you. If I'm doing a really shitty job, really there, I'm not showing up and I'm really making crises and bad stuff, then I would do whatever I can to fire you. And if I cannot, I cannot, but once I can, you are gonna be the one who will be fired. And I can also do a wow job. And a wow job is not 20% better or 30% better, but it's like 400% better. Is that employee that you pay them $5,000 and they get you a new big client that pays you $200,000. It's that wow thing that you can do. That thing that makes people be amazed and be like, wow. And this was my focus when it came to the experience, because what I realized is that people didn't really come to eat ice cream. They came to have an experience. And I was focusing on that experience, as I was asking myself, what can I do to make it a wow experience for people? And creating videos, and he was sharing them with all of the employees in the different branches of different tips and tricks and ways that they can do to make a wow experience to every customer. And that's what I did. So it was the best marketing, because people started to post on Facebook about their experiences with the ice cream company, and then more people would come, and we would be in the newspapers, and was really focusing on that, and that was very successful. And I remember that there was one day that I got a phone call from Forbes magazine, and they told me, "Hey, we want to let you know that we chose you to be one of the 30th most influential people in Israel." I was like, "Oh wow, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool." Didn't expect that. And then I started to be like in these communities of these top successful people in Israel, and I started to go to dine with the billionaires of Israel, and started to know more and more people, and people would write to me on Facebook and different ways for questions and for advices, and I was kind of not in a conscious way creating an identity that I was thinking that would make me happy, someone who is smart and wise and successful, and I was recognized and so on. And this identity also gave me a lot of confidence, because suddenly I was someone and people knew it, and it would be like with women as well. Girls would know it. It would make it easier for me to approach and to make connections, and I was kind of being drawn in that identity, and having that cycle of success, wanting to be more successful and more successful, and having these dreams, and I was saying, wow, I can get so much and achieve so much. But at some point I just realized that I'm empty, and that whatever other trophy or success that I got, I was like, okay, but I'm still empty, and it didn't really give me much. And then I understood that actually I don't want to be successful. I want to be happy, and this is the next cycle.